My name is Tessa Moreland. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 7 years I've quietly built a health tech startup from the ground up. No headlines, no applause. And certainly no encouragement from the family, who never quite knew what to do with me. Tonight I was sitting at my brother's engagement party in Santa Barbara, another wine-soaked evening meant to celebrate his latest accomplishment. The Morelands have always been polished, proper, and predictably impressive. My brother Davis is a neurologist. My parents are Stanford alumni with resumes filled with elite boardrooms and Ivy League panels. And me, I was the deviation, the daughter they smiled at politely and explained in half sentences. That was until Davis's fiancée, Elise, looked across the long oak table and suddenly said, "Wait, Moreland, are you Tessa Moreland?" She leaned forward, eyes widening. As in The Founder of Novapath, utensils paused midair. The table went silent, like someone had opened a window and let cold air rush in. My mother's brow furrowed, my father's jaw tightened. Davis looked confused. I simply smiled. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition, long overdue and completely irrelevant to the quiet work I'd already done. Growing up in our house meant deviation was failure. Success was a straight line: medicine, law, finance. My father, Alan Moreland, ran one of the largest medical ethics firms in the state. My mother, Janine, was a biotech executive who could dismantle a boardroom with 3 carefully chosen sentences. Davis followed the path they drew with flawless precision. Family dinners were showcases of his research grants, his perfect GPA, his publications. Then came the ritual question, "And you, Tessa?" I'd explain that I'd built a prototype that could triage ER intake in under 2 minutes. My mom would sip her Chardonnay and hum thoughtfully. "That's interesting, honey, but have you considered regulatory law?" What they called realistic, I called limiting. What they admired, I escaped. At 16, I built a triage interface for a local clinic fundraiser. The coordinator told my mom I was gifted. She smiled politely and replied, "Yes, well, we're hoping she grows into something steady, like administration." That word steady still makes me wince. As if ambition outside their blueprint was fragile, something embarrassing that would eventually correct itself. One morning, I slipped a printout of my first algorithm under my father's Wall Street Journal hoping he'd glance at it. Maybe ask a question. He didn't even look. He just nudged it aside to reach for his espresso. That quiet dismissal hurt more than if he had laughed. When Davis got accepted into medical school, they threw a catered celebration. The same week I qualified for the California State Tech Expo finals. My mother smiled and said, "Maybe next time, Tess, everything's already arranged for Davis's announcement." So I went alone. And I won. I came home holding the trophy with both hands. No one asked how it went. They were busy passing champagne and mailing invitations for Davis's Johns Hopkins send-off. I put the trophy in my closet not as proof of victory but as proof of truth. That night I made a silent vow I would stop chasing their approval. I would build something so real it wouldn't need their validation. College was my first breath of freedom. I chose a small but elite coding institute in Oregon, far from Santa Barbara and even farther from the Moreland name. There I wasn't Davis's sister. I was just Tessa, the one who could turn messy data into systems that actually worked. In my sophomore year, I met Lena Chen. Lena was brilliant and restless, always questioning the rules everyone else followed without thinking. We bonded instantly, 2 women with chips on our shoulders and fire in our veins. Nights were spent in her off-campus garage debugging code over cold Thai takeout and borrowed routers. We weren't building for grades, we were building because we couldn't stop. Novapath began on a scrap of graph paper, an intuitive encrypted interface designed to fix communication gaps in hospitals. Lena's uncle died after a prescription mix-up. My grandmother was misdiagnosed 3 times in a year. We didn't just believe the system was broken, we knew it. While our classmates polished resumes for career fairs, we filed LLC paperwork using prize money from a regional pitch contest. Her family cheered us on. Mine still assumed I was doing temporary IT work. I let them believe it. It hurt less than explaining a dream they couldn't even imagine. 7 years later, NovaPath quietly powered triage and patient data routing in over 200 hospitals across 3 continents. We had raised major funding, hired a global team, and reduced emergency intake errors in several partner hospitals by nearly 30%, and my family had no idea. Which is why that moment at the engagement party was so surreal. Elise leaned closer, clearly excited. "I read about NovaPath last month," she said. "Your platform was featured in MedTech Global Asterisk." "The ER triage AI system, right?" My father blinked slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, turning toward me. "Did she say you founded this company?" I nodded once. "Yes." Davis looked genuinely puzzled. "Wait, you run a medical software company?" I shrugged lightly. "Health tech platform, mostly hospital systems integration." The table went silent again. My mother set down her wine glass carefully. "How large is this platform?" she asked. I took a sip of water before answering. "About 200 hospitals currently." My brother's fiancée gasped softly. My father leaned back in his chair, processing. "And NovaPath, that's the company that just partnered with the National Hospital Network?" Elise nodded quickly. "Yes, that one." I smiled politely. "We signed that contract last quarter." My mother stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" she asked quietly. I thought about that question for a long moment. Then I answered honestly, "Because for a long time," I said gently, "I didn't think you were listening." No one spoke after that. The same people who once dismissed my ideas were now staring at me across the table, as if trying to reconcile the girl they overlooked with the woman sitting in front of them. But the truth was, their recognition no longer mattered. I had already built the thing they never believed I could. And whether they applauded or stayed silent, NovaPath was still changing lives every single day. I still remember the month we couldn't make rent in our tiny South Loop apartment. Instead of panicking, Lena suggested we build our landlord a new website in exchange for a 1-month extension. He agreed, somewhat amused. It bought us time to code, time to dream. Bit by bit, NovaPath began to grow. We pitched to small angel investors in makeshift conference rooms. We brought on Elias, a beckon wizard who dropped out of Caltech. Then came our first deal with a mid-size regional health network in Indiana, then another and another. Each new win arrived with disbelief and wonder. We were building something real, something that saved time, prevented errors, made care smoother. But I never told my family, not even when we passed 100,000 users. Not when we secured $3,200,000 in our Series A round. They never asked. By then, Davis had become chief resident at UCLA. My parents' Christmas newsletter still referred to me as Tessa, who's exploring freelance tech work in Chicago. I let it stand, not out of bitterness but protection. What Lena and I were building was too sacred to expose to people who once labeled it a distraction. But success doesn't need a spotlight to make noise. It hums, it expands. By the time I turned 30, NovaPath was valued at over $85 million. We had contracts with 130 hospitals, a full staff, real HR, and a waiting list that stretched into the next fiscal year. We declined 3 acquisition offers already. We weren't done. Then one morning, a message hit my inbox from a name that made me freeze. Harper Chen, Director of Strategic Partnerships at Horizon Health Systems. She wanted a meeting to explore a potential mission alignment. I read it twice, then searched her. Harper Chen, Moreland Davis's fiancée. I told no one, not Lena, not our advisor, not even Jules, who knew everything else. For a week, I sat with it. The woman marrying my brother was trying to acquire the company I'd built in silence. She hadn't made the connection yet, of course. I'd always stayed off the radar. No press photos, no panels, just a first name and a few journal blurs. But the engagement dinner was approaching fast, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. If you've ever stayed quiet while building something powerful just to let the results speak louder than the noise, then this story is for you. Don't miss what happens when Harper finally connects the dots. Subscribe to the channel now so you're the first to see how everything unfolds at the engagement dinner. Harper's family is accomplished. We want to present well. Translation: don't embarrass us with your usual practical wardrobe. Of course, I replied, I'll wear something elegant. I chose a black dress. Sleek, minimal, structured, not flashy, not submissive, just quietly powerful, not to impress anyone, just to feel like myself. I didn't need armor anymore, I was the armor. The restaurant was a gleaming tower of glass and modernism. Riverton-on-Lake, the newest Michelin-starred darling in downtown Chicago, perched right above the waterline. I arrived precisely on time. Not early enough to fuss with name cards, not late enough to be dramatic, just present. Davis greeted me with his usual warm confidence. "Tess, glad you made it." He gestured toward a tall, poised woman at his side. "This is Harper." She extended a manicured hand. Her smile was graceful, her gaze steady, exactly the type of woman my mother always hoped I'd emulate. Articulate, stylish, visibly accomplished. "Congratulations," I said warmly, shaking her hand. She smiled back, unaware, at least for now. Dinner started with champagne flutes and scripted compliments. My father's toast highlighted Davis's recent publication on cognitive neurology. My mother dapped tears while reminiscing about his first science fair. No one mentioned me. I was seated beside a cousin who leaned over and asked, still bouncing between gigs. "I'm in health tech," I answered. "Oh," she said, tilting her head like an app, "something like that between courses." An uncle chimed in. "Davis said you might get an interview with Apple." "Entry-level but still solid." I smiled, non-committal. "That won't be necessary." From across the table I caught Harper studying me, really studying me, like someone flipping through mental files. Her brow furrowed, she tilted her head. "Essa Moreland," she said aloud. "Wait, Moreland?" Davis laughed. "Yeah, she's my sister." Harper's eyes widened. She slowly set her fork down. "You're Tessa Moreland from Nova Path." The air crystallized. Forks paused. Even the wait staff seemed to stall mid-step. "I am," I replied calmly. "You're the founder of Nova Path." My mother's expression faltered, her smile frozen in place. My father stopped mid-sip. Harper turned to Davis, her voice full of disbelief. "You never told me your sister built Nova Path." "The company we're about to acquire," Harper said slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. Davis blinked. I'm sorry, what?" "Tessa, no, that's, you must be confused. My sister works in tech support or something." "No," Harper interrupted, her voice clear and firm. "Your sister is the co-founder and CEO of the most advanced healthcare communications platform on the market. We've been in discussions with her company for the past 6 weeks. The current valuation over $200 million, $0. The silence that followed was absolute. One by one, heads turned toward me. My mother's hand moved to her necklace like it could anchor her. My father's confident posture sagged just slightly, like he was suddenly seeing me for the first time and wasn't sure what to make of it. Davis stared at me, eyes wide. "Is that true?" he whispered. "Yes," I said evenly. "We started Nova Path in a garage. We now serve over 300 hospitals nationwide." No one spoke. Not even Harper, who now looked at me with a complicated blend of apology and admiration. The rest of the dinner passed in fragments. Aunt Karen asked if I had stock tips. A cousin who once mocked my career path leaned in, all curiosity and fake warmth. My mother, who once told me to aim for law school, mentioned 3 times that she always knew I had a flair for innovation. My father claimed he'd told colleagues about my tech project years ago. I let them say whatever they needed to say. I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I didn't need to. Davis, though, he stayed quiet. The shock hadn't worn off. He picked up his wine glass, missed it, and just sat there with his hand resting flat on the linen as though he'd forgotten how to move. After dessert, Harper approached me near the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to out you like that." I shook my head. "You didn't." That moment was always going to come. "Well," she added, her voice soft, You built something that's saving lives. Our team talks about NovaPath constantly. Now I know why they're so protective. You built more than a product, you built trust. I nodded thank you, and I meant it. That night I walked to my car without looking back. They finally saw me, but the truth was I had become everything I needed to be long before they noticed. We need to talk. Brunch tomorrow, 11 a.m. at the Waldron Hotel. That was my mother's message. My father's came 2 minutes later. Proud of you, let's catch up. Davis's text didn't arrive until nearly midnight. It was brief. Why didn't you tell me? I stared at that one the longest. Why hadn't I told them? Because I didn't want to need their recognition. Because I wasn't sure which would hurt more, being dismissed again or finally being acknowledged, but only after I'd already built everything on my own. Still, I agreed to brunch. Some things needed to be said. They were already seated when I arrived at the Waldron's restaurant in River North. My mother wore pearls and a crisp silk blouse. My father had on his most formal sport coat. They looked less like parents and more like partners attending a board meeting, like my success suddenly required a shift in tone. Tessa, my father said, rising awkwardly. He half-hugged me with unfamiliar stiffness. You look well, my mother added, eyes scanning me like an annual report. She didn't wait. I've been reading everything, the awards, the funding rounds, the growth. It's all impressive. She paused, but why didn't you share any of this with us? I folded the napkin on my lap. Because the last time I tried, you suggested I apply for a front desk job. That's not fair, my father said, bristling. We were trying to help. No, I replied evenly. You were trying to fix something that wasn't broken. My mother's smile faltered. We didn't understand the tech space. It felt risky, unstable, and medicine doesn't, I asked gently, law doesn't. That's different, those are structured. I nodded. Exactly, that's what scared you. I chose something you couldn't control. My father exhaled. But you're clearly brilliant, Tessa, we always knew. No, I said, voice soft but steady. You knew what you wanted me to be. That's not the same. The waiter arrived with coffee, offering us a moment to regroup. I stirred in cream, collecting myself. I spent years building something I loved, I said, and every time I tried to share it, it felt like shouting into wind. Eventually, I just stopped. We thought you were lost, my mother whispered. I wasn't, I said, I just wasn't yours to direct anymore. The silence that followed was thin like glass, but it held. We love you, she said. I know, I replied. But love without respect doesn't feel like love. For a moment, my father looked genuinely unsure, like a man who had built a life on being right and was suddenly wondering if somewhere along the way he'd gotten something terribly wrong. The rest of brunch passed more gently, less posturing, more listening. They asked real questions about Lena, about the garage in Portland where it all started, about our first nerve-wracking pitch to a regional hospital. My mother even admitted she'd read an article on startup culture but couldn't understand half the acronyms. It was the most unguarded she'd been in years. We never meant to make you feel small, my father said softly as we reached for the check. You didn't mean to, I replied. But you did, and I had to learn how to grow around that, he nodded slowly. I'm glad you did, even if it wasn't with us. When we left the Waldron, there were no dramatic hugs, no movie-worthy reconciliation, just a plan to meet again for dinner next week. It was something. A few days later, Davis showed up at my apartment with a bottle of Cabernet and a bakery box. I tried baking, he said sheepishly. It went badly. These are plan B, I laughed. Classic you. We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, the skyline shimmering through the windows. I need to say this, he began without preamble. I'm sorry. I turned toward him, surprised. I thought you were floundering. I bought into their version of success. I never even asked. You weren't the only one, I said, but you're the only one here now. He raised his glass to the black sheep. I raised mine to the sheep that built an empire. 6 months later, the Horizon deal closed. NovaPath became part of a global tech portfolio. Lena led global strategy. I stepped into the role of head of innovation. My office overlooked the Chicago River, but that wasn't the real change. The real change was my mother texting me articles, my father attending Demos, and Davis quoting me in grand rounds. The biggest change: me mentoring girls in STEM, telling them you don't need permission to matter. Build anyway, believe first, because recognition fades but conviction that stays. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or told your dreams were impractical, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your story, your journey, or simply your thoughts. Your support means more than you know.